The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a messenger who seemed almost embarrassed to hand it over. Margaret Holloway stood in the doorway of her cramped boarding house room, turning the envelope over in her hands as if it might bite her. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind used by lawyers who charged by the word. She had never received a letter from a lawyer before. She had never received much of anything from anyone. The name on the return address meant nothing to her, but inside, folded neatly and sealed with wax, was news that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her life. Her father, a man she had never met, a name her mother had spoken only twice in Margaret's entire childhood, was dead. And he had left her something. Not an apology, not an explanation, not even a photograph to prove he had ever existed. He had left her land. Margaret read the words 3 times before they made any sense. A parcel in the Arizona territory, described in dry legal terms that gave no hint of what waited for her there. The lawyer's letter suggested she might wish to sell the property, as it was considered. The word worthless was not used, but it hung in the air between every carefully chosen phrase. The town where Margaret worked as a seamstress was small, and news traveled faster than kindness. Within a week, everyone knew about her inheritance, and everyone had an opinion. The women at the church social smiled with their mouths while their eyes calculated what this meant for her station. The men at the mercantile laughed openly at the notion of a woman trying to claim desert land. Singing Sands, they called it, a place where the dunes made sounds like voices in the wind, where nothing grew and no one stayed. A worthless joke of an inheritance from a father who had clearly wanted to insult her from beyond the grave. But Margaret had spent 32 years being told what she could not do, what she was not worthy of, what she should not hope for. She had mended other women's wedding dresses and watched them walk down aisles she would never cross. She had hemmed children's trousers for families she would never have. And somewhere in the silence of her small room, with the letter spread across her knees, something hardened in her chest. She would go. Not because the land was valuable, not because she expected to find anything there, but because it was hers. The only thing anyone had ever given her that was truly, completely hers. The journey west took 6 weeks by train, then 3 days by wagon, then another day on foot when the trail ran out. Margaret's hands, skilled with needle and thread, blistered around the handle of a canvas bag that held everything she owned. The landscape changed around her. Greens faded to brown. Trees vanished into scrub, and scrub gave way to endless stretches of sand and rock beneath a sky so vast it seemed to swallow sound itself. By the time she crested the final ridge, her boots were worn thin, her bonnet was a ruin, and her heart was pounding with a fear she refused to name. What she saw below took her breath away, though not in the way she had expected. The land was not ugly. It was terrible in its beauty waves of sand in shades of gold and rose, carved by wind into shapes that seemed almost alive. Dunes rose and fell like a frozen sea, stretching to a horizon that shimmered with heat. And there, at the edge of it all, stood a cabin. Not the grand homestead she had never expected, but a small, weathered structure that had somehow survived in this place where nothing was supposed to grow. Someone had lived here. Someone had tried. The cabin door hung open, warped by heat and time, and inside Margaret found evidence of the man who had built it, her father. She realized with a jolt that made her press her hand to her chest. A table, a chair, a bed frame of lashed wood and rawhide. A stack of notebooks filled with handwriting that grew shakier as the pages turned, chronicling years of solitude and study. And on the table, centered as if waiting for her, a single sheet of paper with words written in a hand that had known it was writing its last message. "The sand sings," it read. "Listen, and you will find what you are looking for." That first night, Margaret sat on the cabin's tiny porch and listened. The wind came with the setting sun, as if the desert had been holding its breath all day and only now felt safe to exhale. And the sand did sing. It was not a sound she could compare to anything else, a low hum that seemed to come from the earth itself, rising and falling like a chorus of distant voices, sometimes mournful, sometimes almost joyful. She sat there until the stars emerged, until the moon rose and painted the dunes silver, and she understood why her father had stayed. Not for wealth, for this. Days became weeks. Margaret explored the dunes, her father's notebooks in her hands, learning the patterns of the wind, the way the sand shifted with the seasons, the strange acoustics that made certain dunes sing and others remain silent. She repaired the cabin with hands more accustomed to silk than timber. She found a spring hidden in a cleft of rock, water so pure it made her weep. And slowly, quietly, she stopped being the woman who had arrived, afraid, uncertain, waiting for someone to tell her she was not enough. The desert asked nothing of her but that she be present. And for the first time in her life, she was. He appeared on a morning when the singing was louder than usual, a vibration in the air that Margaret could feel in her bones. She was standing on the highest dune, her father's notebook open in her hands, when she looked up and saw a rider on the ridge. Horse and man were silhouetted against the dawn, motionless, watching her as she had been watching the sand. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the rider touched his hat and descended, his horse picking its way down the dune with the care of an animal that knew this landscape better than any human ever could. His name was Elias Cole, and he had been working this territory for 20 years, guiding surveyors and prospectors and the occasional lost traveler through lands that most people feared. He was a quiet man, his face weathered by sun and wind, his eyes the pale blue of a sky after rain. He had known her father, he said, settling onto the porch as if he had always been there, had helped him build the cabin, had shared meals with him, had listened to his theories about the singing sands when no one else would. He spoke of you, Elias said, and Margaret's hands tightened around her cup. Said he had a daughter somewhere. Said he hoped one day you'd hear the sand sing for yourself. Elias did not stay. He had supplies to deliver, boundaries to mark, work that paid in coin rather than conversation. But he returned a week later, and then again, and again. Each time, he brought something: coffee, nails for the roof, a book he thought she might like. Each time, he stayed longer, helping her mend the fence her father had built around the spring, teaching her to read the desert signs, showing her which plants could heal and which could harm. And each time, when he rode away, Margaret found herself watching the ridge until he disappeared, her chest tight with something she was afraid to name. It was Elias who explained the singing, not as magic, though he did not dismiss the wonder in her eyes. He showed her how the wind moved across the dunes, how the grains of sand were shaped by centuries of movement, how certain conditions made them vibrate like strings on a cello. Your father figured it out, he said one evening, as the dunes hummed around them. He mapped every dune, charted every frequency, said the sand was talking if you knew how to listen. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather folder, worn soft with handling. He left this for you too, in case you came. Inside the folder were maps, dozens of them, drawn in her father's increasingly unsteady hand. They showed the dunes in every season, every wind pattern, every shift and change. And on the last map, in the center of the largest dune, her father had drawn a single symbol, a circle, a star, a mark that meant something. He believed there was something beneath the singing dune, Elias said quietly. Something the sand was trying to protect. Or maybe something it was trying to reveal. He looked at her then, his pale eyes steady. He never had the resources to dig, but he always hoped you would. Margaret stood at the base of the largest dune the next morning, a shovel in her hands that Elias had left behind. The sand sang around her, a deep, resonant hum that she could feel in her teeth, her bones, her heart. She thought of her father, alone in this vast place, listening to the same sound, dreaming of something he could never quite reach. She thought of the life she had left behind, the small rooms, the small expectations, the small, shrinking world that had told her she was nothing. And she began to dig, not for treasure, not for answers, for him, for the connection they had never had, for proof that his hope had not been foolish. Days of digging became weeks. Elias came and went, bringing food, water, and the steady, wordless companionship that had become as essential to Margaret as the air she breathed. Sometimes he dug beside her, his strength a counterpoint to her determination. Sometimes he sat on the dune's crest and watched, his presence a quiet anchor in the vastness. The sand sang constantly now, as if it knew something was changing, as if it was trying to tell her something she could almost understand. And then, on a morning when the sky was the color of pearls, her shovel struck something that was not sand. The stone was smooth, shaped by hands that had lived long before any memory this land held. Margaret cleared the sand away with her fingers, trembling, and found not one stone, but many a circle of them, arranged in a pattern that made her heart stop. Elias was beside her before she could call out, his hand on her shoulder, his breath catching as he saw what she had found. "An old sight," he said, his voice rough, "prehistoric. Your father, he must have suspected. The singing, the acoustics. He thought the sand was hiding something. He was right. They excavated carefully, methodically, over weeks that felt like days. What they found was not gold or silver, nothing the town would have understood as treasure. They found pottery shards painted with symbols that matched her father's maps, tools shaped from stone and bone, the remains of a civilization that had lived here long before any European had ever dreamed of this land. And in the center of the circle, buried deeper than the rest, they found a vessel of fired clay, sealed with a substance that had hardened into something like glass. When Margaret finally opened it, her hands shaking, she found not riches, but something infinitely more precious. Inside the vessel was a scroll, painted on hide so thin it was almost translucent, covered with images and symbols that told a story. A story of people who had lived in harmony with the singing sands, who had understood the desert in ways modern men had forgotten. A story of water and wind, of cycles and seasons, of a wisdom that had been buried but never lost. Margaret held it in her hands, the morning light catching the faded pigments, and she understood what her father had been searching for. Not wealth, not fame, understanding. The knowledge that he had not been alone in this vast, beautiful, terrible place. That someone had been here before him, listening to the same song, watching the same stars. Elias found her sitting on the porch that evening, the scroll carefully wrapped and set aside, her father's notebook open in her lap. The sand was quiet now, the wind having shifted, and the silence was like a held breath. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and for a long time, neither spoke. "You found it," he said finally. "What you came for." Margaret looked at him, this quiet man who had appeared on her ridge like an answer to a question she had not known she was asking. "I came for land," she said softly. "I found a history, a purpose, a place where I belong." She looked out at the dunes, gold and rose in the fading light, and then back at him. "And someone who saw me when I couldn't see myself." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then his hand found hers, calloused fingers intertwining with her own. "Your father left you a mystery," he said. "You solved it. But what you built here, that's yours. All yours." The first star appeared above the singing dunes, and Margaret Holloway, who had inherited nothing but sand and silence, finally understood what she had truly been given. Not a fortune, not a secret, a home, and the courage to claim it.